Right, hi everyone. Welcome to our Bucks webinar on mental health in student sport. My name is Georgie. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Bucks, and it's great to see so many of you taking such a big interest in an important topic. We had nearly 300 people register for tonight's webinar, which is fantastic to see. This is the second in our series of mental health webinars that we've done. So for this one, we're tying it into University Mental Health Day on Thursday. We really just want to use these sessions to talk very openly about mental health, so the positives, challenges, and then the potential impact of sport on it as well. So today we are lucky to be joined by a panel of brilliant speakers. Students-wise, we've got Issy Walker, who is the Chair of Welfare and Sport Committee at the University of Nottingham. We've got Danny Fagan, who is a lacrosse player at the University of Derby and a podcast producer of the Changing Mentality podcast. And we've also got Ali McDermid, who is a basketball player at Heriot Watt Uni. So we'll also be hearing from Dr. Pippa Cave-Ayland, who is a sports psychiatrist, and we've got Sophie Cohen-Jones from our partners Student Minds as well. We'll finish with a panel Q&A session, and a lot of you have submitted questions already, but please do use the Q&A function on Zoom if you would like to ask any of our questions to speakers as we go through the webinar. If you could also highlight who you'd like to answer your question, if appropriate, that would be great as well, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. So this webinar is being recorded, and we'll share it via email with you tomorrow. Just to caveat as well that the webinar is around mental health and wellbeing, so there might be some potentially triggering content that we wanted to make you aware of, such as one of our panelists discussing his friend's suicide. If at any point you do not feel comfortable listening or no longer want to take part in the webinar, please just do feel free to mute or exit it. We've also just going to post some resources from Student Minds in the chat as well, so you have them to hand during the webinar, and we'll send other resources in a follow-up email tomorrow. So first of all, we're going to be speaking to Issy, who is Chair of Welfare and Sport at Nottingham. So as a Nottingham graduate myself, I was there when the Welfare and Sport Committee first started. Back in, I think 2015 it was. I think I'm involved in the initial promotional video of it. If we look back in the archives. But Issy is a fourth year medic, so spends her time balancing welfare and sport, her degree, and also sailing as well. So welcome, Issy. You can unmute yourself
now.
Yeah,
I'm unmuted now. I was trying to see if that would unmute, but yeah, we're unmuted.
So just to start with, if you could tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into welfare in sport, and your role there.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I have a background in sailing, and also I do a bit of rowing on the side. I think before I started university, I did a lot more rowing than sailing. And when I started university, I was completely overwhelmed by, I think, the idea of joining a sports club where people who are a lot older than me seemed really good at their sports and genuinely seemed a lot better than me. And I think that completely drove my anxiety to just levels of just completely to a level where I thought, you know what, I'm just not even going to try. I thought, no, I'm not even, actually I did try, and that didn't go so well. I didn't cope very well. I thought, you know what, I'm just not good enough. And I think that's the key concept I got in my head, that I'm not good enough, I'm not going to do it. And so first year, I struggled quite a lot with that, with the anxiety, sense of just not very good self-worth. And sport, which was such a big part of my life for university, just kind of got faded out. And I missed that. And my mental health suffered because of that.
Yeah.
And then second year came along and something in me decided, you know what, we're going to try sailing. Don't know what it was, but it's a really good decision, because sailing was one of the best decisions I ever made. I've met some amazing friends through sailing, and I've met some people who really encouraged me to get into welfare provision at university, both through my experiences and through people at sailing club who thought, hey, you'd be quite good as a welfare officer. So I did that because I like taking on things, which I often do. And then after that happened, I started to notice these things coming up about this society called Welfare and Sport. And I thought, seems interesting. What's this? Something else I can take on? Which it was.
Another thing.
Another thing. And later on, I became their social media officer. And what that involved was we built up their social media platforms, which has become quite quiet over the last few years.
Yeah.
And we built it up to gain quite a following throughout all the many university clubs we have at Nottingham. And then for this year, so 2020 to 21, I've become their chair. So just really building up from someone who was way too scared to set foot in the sports centre to actually someone who absolutely loves driving one of the key forces within the university welfare and sport. So yeah, and I love it, and I'm going to find it really hard to let go of it, I know. So,
I know that's a really brilliant journey to hear, taking something that was perhaps not so positive in your life and turning it into something really positive. And you can also give a quick plug to Welfare and Sport's Instagram account now, if you wish.
At Welfare and Sport. Yeah, it's pretty simple. I'm sure George will send out an email after this.
So leading on from that, if you just tell us more about what Welfare and Sport does. Obviously there's a lot of sporting clubs at Nottingham, so how you go about supporting those, how it works, what your aims are, a bit about the Welfare and Sport pledges as well.
Yeah, so what we do at Welfare and Sport is really just promote good mental health within the sports clubs at Nottingham, and that's in two aspects. One is showing the sports clubs how good a mechanism they have, like how good a thing they have which can be used to promote such good mental health. So the sport that they do can be utilized to be so beneficial for their members to have such good mental health, and also to show these sports clubs that actually mental health is really common within the student population compared to other demographics, and that, you know, you within your sports club, it's more than likely you'll have someone who's maybe having a pretty hard time with their mental health, and to be able to, you know, be at least aware of some signposting, some things that you can do to support them is really useful, and that's what we try and provide. And what we do make clear though is that we're not trained counsellors, we are not professionals. So although half our committee are medics, we admittedly we're not trained to be able to provide counselling or you know, be a GP. But we can signpost you to those and listen, which is, you know, helpful. And one way that we do try and show clubs that, and club members especially, that their clubs are actually caring about their members is through what we call the Welfare and Sport Pledge, which I think was one of the key things that Welfare and Sport started up with, which is every club at the beginning of the year signed a pledge, which is say they come up with 3 things that they will do throughout the year to support their members' mental health. So for instance, it might be that they hold a termly welfare social where they were going to have a cup of tea and a cake at a local cafe or something along those lines, or they'll check in after each session, or they'll have a dedicated welfare member on committee, something along those lines that, you know, is there especially for the members of their club. And I think this year we had the most ever clubs actually sign one of those, and even had some non-sports clubs sign one, which was pretty cool.
It's brilliant. It shows the impact that you're making across the university. Is there anywhere that people can go to see these kind of pledges? Like, do you have them on your Instagram or your website or anything?
Yeah, so they're all highlighted on our Instagram at the moment. And we've just made a new website, which is one of my things that I did when I was trying not to do university work. And so I'm in the process of uploading these pledges from like the last 3 years. We have records of them onto the website so people can see what these clubs have been doing and building up on throughout the years. And so you can see these pledges, and we've also got templates so that, you know, clubs that maybe haven't done one can just do one if they want to at different points throughout the year.
Yeah, it's a really good way for other universities to perhaps incorporate some of that into your own clubs, and if you want, like, your own team can make these pledges. So obviously this period has been really tricky for the clubs themselves, not being able to see their members as normal, talk to them as normal. Can you talk to us a bit about how you've helped clubs during lockdown, in terms of like blogs, and I know you've done some podcasts as well.
Trust me, our podcasts probably aren't quite up to Danny's, which you'll hear about later, but they're getting there. I mean, soon you'll have some competition, Danny. But I mean, we've got such a good committee this year, and I mean, we're electing a new committee soon, and I'll be so sad to see this one go because they've been so innovative. But so we set up this new website, and we started making blogs about, different things that we've done with welfare, so different considerations that our committee members have had, and even guest blogs. So people from the university sports clubs have actually texted us, messaged us, say, hey, we've seen your website, can I write a blog about it? And so like members of the ladies hockey club especially have been wanting to talk about how their teammates have been really good in lockdown about supporting their mental health and stress and things like that. And that's really nice to see that actually they're really interacting with it. We did start off a podcast. We can't do it at the moment because the person who edits them, his Wi-Fi is not great at the moment.
21st century problems.
That's one thing, but they'll be coming back soon. So they're on a hiatus, but and we've also been like at the beginning of April last year, so we got together most of the university sports clubs and made a video together, like a lockdown togetherness, I guess, video. And that was a really nice thing to do, like to feel like as a UN sport community, like coming together. And that was all like something we did just sort of, on the cusp, like, oh, we need something to do. Here's something we can do as a group. And that was a really nice, I guess, thing that people actually really wanted to get involved in. And that's always nice when people really want to get involved with your little projects that you come up with when you're lying in bed at night thinking, oh, I wonder if people want to do that.
Well, definitely a project very well received. So how have the individual teams at Nottingham supported their members during lockdown? Like, I know when we spoke before, you mentioned about how they were keeping morale high through different challenges, like Instagram kind of welfare takeovers. Can you just give us a few kind of examples of what you've seen and you've really liked?
So we've got our triathlon club, and our triathlon club are absolutely brilliant. So they're always up to something.
Hope there's someone from UON triathlon on the webinar now.
I did tell their president that they might be getting a mention. But yeah, they're always up to something. We actually featured them on the podcast. Like, they really are great. And they, in Nottingham, we have a right next to our campus, we have Woollerton Park. And so, of course, they come up with their Welfare Wednesday Woollerton one, which is meant to be run, but they wanted to alliterate it. But so when lockdown's not quite as strict as it is now, they'd go on, runs in pairs or in groups, and they'd have a chat while they're running to Woollerton Park and back. And, it's not a timed run, but it's just a training session where actually it's not about the time they got, it's just about how are they finding things during lockdown, which I thought was a really nice thing to do. And they have so many other alliterated sessions.
You mentioned the trisolation challenge.
They have trisolation challenges as well, in which they'll go around different parks and streets in Nottingham and spell out UON try in the streets or the paths in the park, or cycling, or I think they've swum a few on Strava, which is impressive. So yeah, that's one club that, that's how they do it. So they're a very active club, and that's how they go about things. And they have their triathlete of the week. They'll always post on Instagram about how great their members are. So it really keeps them like really, I guess, involved and encouraged. And that's really nice to see. And then we've got the Water Polo Club, who's another one of our clubs that are always really engaged with us. and always want to get involved. And they have 2 welfare sects, which is actually, they were the first club to do it, and now it's becoming quite a thing in Nottingham for the people to have more than one welfare sec. So I think there's a male and a female one, which is really quite a good thing for them to have, actually, that so people have a choice of who to reach out to, so it's not just one person. And they hold every week a welfare takeover on their Instagram, so people can submit questions to them and they'll answer on their Instagram stories. And I think that's a really nice thing to have, that, you know, people actually do interact with their welfare secs, which shows that they're actually, people do trust them and want to engage with them and enjoy their what they're having to say, and actually listen to them, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, very, very beneficial, especially during this time. So final question, some people might be listening to this and feeling very inspired and want to create their own welfare in sport society at their own university. What are the important things to consider should you want to create one, from your own experience?
I'd say the most important thing is, don't forget to factor in how many university clubs you have and how you're going to control that. Because I mean, at Nottingham we have, I think at last count it was just over 70, so between 70 and 75. I don't want to give an incorrect number. So we have at the moment 5 people with the same role, and that is the club liaison officer. So those are people who literally their role is to liaise with these clubs and ensure that they're getting the messages across. Well, no, the messages that we're saying are getting across to them. And anything that they're saying is getting across to us. So there's actually a really good communication flow, because otherwise it's so easy for things to get just lost in the abyss of the social media world or emails or anything along those lines. And having someone, you know, that they know a little bit better than just a committee of people that they might not know, but actually having someone who introduces themselves to them a bit better or works with them a bit closer, they get a little bit more contact with, is a much better way of engaging with them with what we're doing than, you know, as I said, just having a few people that they know of from behind the scenes. And that's something that, you know, we really do like to keep up. And as I said, we did increase that this year from 4 to 5 officers, and it's worked a lot better. So hopefully that's something to keep going.
Awesome. That kind of concludes our mini Q&A, but Issy will be around later for our main Q&A. Should you have any more questions for her, just pop them in the Q&A function. So thank you, Issy, for that. I'm going to pop a poll now up on the screen that just asks if you've participated in any lockdown activities put on by your team or club. This is completely anonymous. All the polls during this webinar are. So I'll get you to fill out that while I'm introducing our next guest. So next we're going to hear from Dr. Pippa Cave-Ayland. So Pippa's a registered psychiatrist with a focus on sports and is also a keen triathlete herself. Over the past 2 years, she's been working in the sports sector and is going to spend the next 10 minutes or so giving more of a kind of scientific take on things, such as the mental health challenges that athletes are more susceptible to and how to combat these. So I will pass over to you, Pippa, and hopefully you can share your screen okay.
Yep, I'll do that now. Thank you for the introduction. Just bear with me 2 seconds.
No worries. Okay, we can see your screen.
Okay, I hope everyone can see that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So as Georgie said, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm based in Surrey. I've been working in psychiatry now for about 7 years or so. So I've got quite a varied experience for things. And I've also got a long-standing interest in sports and the mental health in athletes as well. And in the last year, I've been doing a project which is aimed at reaching out to different sports teams, like loads of different sports at lots of different levels, just trying to raise awareness of the common mental health problems that can occur in athletes, because there are mental health problems that occur more commonly in athletes than in the general population, and some that are even exclusive to the athletic population. So yeah, it's been a good project to sort of try and raise awareness of that and get clubs talking about it. So what I'm going to give you today is sort of a shortened version of the presentation that I give to clubs when I speak to them. So the things that we're going to be talking about are depression, overtraining syndrome and how that can mimic depression. We'll talk about relative energy deficiency in sports, and then we'll go through some take-home messages at the end. So first of all, let's talk about depression. So this is really, really common. About 20% of people have experienced some of these symptoms at some point in their life. So, quite a few of you will be familiar with at least some of these. Depression is diagnosable sort of clinically when you've had some of these symptoms for more than 2 weeks. That's sort of when a GP will start to think about treating you for it. And just to say as well, it really, really often coexists with anxiety. Sometimes we just treat them both together. It's really, really difficult to tell them apart. So let's just go through some of the symptoms. So the first one is low mood. So that's sort of a persistent feeling of sadness, which you feel most days, almost all the time. You can get fatigued, which can range from maybe you just sort of not sort of fatiguing a bit more quickly within sort of training sessions or competitions. But on the extreme side of it, it can be so bad that sometimes you can't get out of bed, you find it hard to wash your hair, brush your teeth, or just do your normal daily living activities. Your sleep can be interrupted, appetite can be reduced, your concentration can be reduced, which is quite important for athletes because that can actually predispose us to injuries. You might stop enjoying your usual activities. So training might be a bit of a chore, going to uni might be a chore rather than sort of enjoying it. The technical term for that is anhedonia, and that's what is the yellow word behind the guy's head in the cartoon there. And all of that can lead to feelings of hopelessness. So the depression is quite difficult to diagnose in athletes because when we overtrain, it can mimic depression very, very closely. Some of the key differences are that with overtraining syndrome, you might get some chronic muscle or joint pain, which sort of comes with the territory. Sort of all the athletes are sort of familiar with experiencing that. It can affect your immune system, so you might get ill a bit more frequently, so just coughs and colds, flu-like symptoms. And your resting heart rate is persistently above what it normally is. So I know that lots of people use fitness trackers and things these days. And if you notice your resting heart rate going sort of 5 to 10 beats per minute above what it usually is, that could be a sign that you're overtraining. And just to say as well that overtraining is different to overreaching. So overtraining is when you're pushing hard during training sessions, you're sort of progressing your fitness levels, but you're not allowing adequate rest in between. Whereas overreaching is when you do allow adequate rest in between, you allow your body to recover. So that's really, really important. So the other key difference is that the symptoms of overtraining syndrome improve with rest. So that doesn't necessarily mean just skipping a training session, having one rest day here or there. It means sort of resting for a prolonged period of time, a week or two maybe, or just reducing the frequency and intensity of your training over a longer period of time. And those symptoms should start to get a little bit better. If the symptoms are severe or they don't go away when you've rested, that might be a sign that you're suffering from depression and you need to go and get help from a GP or another trusted source. Also, if you have any thoughts of suicide or self-harm, that is when it becomes really, really urgent. So, do not wait to get help in that situation. Go straight to somebody that you trust and talk about it. And the good news is that common mental health problems like depression and anxiety, they're really easily treatable. So the GP will recommend talking therapies or sometimes medications. And yeah, the prognosis is generally good, especially if it's caught early. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is relative energy deficiency in sport. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about this is because this comes sort of hand in hand with eating disorders or just not eating correctly. And that's really common in athletes. It's more common in athletes than in the general population. So in the general population, around 5% of people experience some of the symptoms of eating disorders, not necessarily meeting the diagnostic criteria, but just have some symptoms of disordered eating. Whereas in the athletic population, particularly in the leanness sports, like the endurance sports or the anti-gravitational sports, for example, it's around 15%. So it's really, really important to be aware of that. And red S occurs when your energy availability is persistently low. So that means that your energy intake is less than your energy expenditure. So basically, you're not eating as much as you should be for the activities that you're doing. So to protect yourself from red S, you should be eating around 45 calories roughly per kilogram of fat-free mass per day. It seems like a lot, but if you're a very active person, like most of you are, then that should be about right, if not more than that. You're putting yourself at risk of getting red S if you're eating less than 30 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day. Okay, so here are some of the symptoms and the complications of red S. So as you can see, they quite closely mimic the slide with overtraining syndrome. So you get quite fatigued. Obviously, you're going to lose weight if you're eating too little. If you lose significant amounts of weight, you can get quite intolerant to cold. So your extremities, like your hands, your feet, your ears, your nose will get cold really quite quickly. Your skin can get very dry. You might lose some hair, not necessarily significant, but you might notice it thinning a bit. It takes longer to recover from injury. I don't just mean sort of ankle sprains and that kind of thing, but even delayed onset muscle soreness takes longer to go away because you're just not providing your body with the nutrition it needs to recover. And as we talked about before, you might get low mood, and ladies, your periods might become irregular, or they might even stop altogether. So some of the complications of these things, so particularly for women, we're at increased risk of fractures, particularly stress fractures. And that is because if your periods stop or become irregular, you're not producing the estrogen that your body normally would. And estrogen is really, really important for bone density. So if you're not producing the estrogen, you're not going to be laying down the bone structure that you need to be. And that leaves you at increased risk of fractures. If you're not eating enough of what you need to be, then you might get iron deficiency anemia. So obviously you're going to get the tiredness, the fatigue, that's going to affect your performance. As I said before, your immune system will be affected, so you'll get ill a bit more frequently. And you could get heart arrhythmias as well. And the way that this works is that if you're not eating and drinking the correct amounts, it can interfere with your electrolytes. So by that, we mean sort of the important salts in your body. The most important ones off the top of my head are sodium and potassium. So what they do is they help to regulate the electrical conduction in your nervous system, which is really important in your heart to keep your heart beating regularly. So if those are disrupted and you're more susceptible to an irregular heart rate, if you add that into a hard training session or a competition, you're going to put yourself at risk. That really could be quite dangerous. And we talked about the depression and anxiety as well. So the good news is that this is treatable. So all you need to do is we go back to the equation. So all you're doing is increasing your energy availability. So you're increasing your energy intake, so you're eating a bit more. You're decreasing your energy expenditure, so you may be reducing the intensity of your training sessions or the frequency of your training sessions, or maybe even taking some time out. And you're reducing your fat-free mass. So by that, I mean just gaining a little bit of weight. It doesn't have to be much, it makes a difference. And it's really important to catch this early, because this takes months and months to recover from. It really is significant. And if there are any coaches listening to this as well, any athlete that gets a stress fracture, you really should be thinking about red S straight away. So my advice would be to talk to the athlete. Athletes talk to each other, talk to your coaches, get help from your GP or dietitian if you suspect this might be the case. And last slide, just my take-home messages for you. Mental illness is really common. That's the main thing. And it's really, really good to hear like the hard work that Issy has clearly been putting in with sort of raising awareness. That's great to hear. You're not suffering alone. It is super common. So talk to people that you trust. I mean, that could be friends, family, but not necessarily. It can be somebody impartial, like your GP, coaches, university counsellors, just anywhere that you feel comfortable to go to, make sure you're talking about it. And on the flip side of that, if you suspect that any of your teammates are suffering, don't be afraid to ask them if they're okay. That isn't going to make it worse. You're not going to like tip them over the edge or anything, but ask them if they're okay. And, you know, I think a lot of people are anxious about asking about mental health, but it doesn't matter what you say to them as long as you're there to listen. That's the thing that makes the difference. And knowing where to signpost them to, which is why talks like these are so good and so important. And remember that, you know, these things are treatable and that there is help out there and is support. And that's about it from me. Just to say as well, if you want a bit more information or if you want me to talk in a bit more detail to one of your teams about mental health problems, then you can contact me. My email address is there and my IG handle is there as well. So I'm happy to be contacted. The only thing just to say, I can't be there for somebody in a crisis. That wouldn't be safe. So, you know, take advice from this talk and sort of use those resources to get help if you need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pippa. That was really interesting to hear from a very scientific point of view. I'm sure there will be quite a few questions popping up for you to answer, and I'll make sure to share your contact details in the follow-up email. So next up we have Ali. So Ali is a currently injured basketball player at Heriot Watt Uni up in Scotland, and a very keen advocate for mental health, having lost one of his best friends to suicide a few years ago. So Ali's going to discuss his own experiences as a result of this and the importance of speaking up to get help. So over to you, Ali.
Thanks, Georgie, and thanks very much for having me tonight. It's a bit of an honour to do this. Yeah, hi folks, how's it going? My name's Ali McDermid. I'm final year chemical engineering student at Heriot Watt. I was the sports union vice president for a year, 2 years ago now. And like Georgie says, semi-retired basketball player, if you will, after a knee injury, which has kept me out since then, but maybe return someday, who knows. But yeah, like Georgie said, sadly, I'm kind of experienced some pretty tough loss in the last, it's actually hard to believe that it was over a year ago, but December 2019 is when I lost my best friend to suicide. Rory and I went to school together. We didn't go to primary school. One of the first people that I probably befriended. Yeah, probably one of the first people I befriended when I went to high school. And from there, you know, we were pretty much inseparable from there. You know, even when I moved through, I'm originally from just outside Glasgow, and when I moved through to Edinburgh, you know, he would still make such a point of coming through to see me, and I'd always see him when we were home. And then he got a job in the Merchant Navy, so he was going all around the world, but even still, we were making an effort to talk to each other as much as we possibly could. And yeah, pretty much inseparable. And then in December 2019, we'd been on holiday the month beforehand, and then in the build up to Christmas, we saw each other every day, pretty much, and then on Christmas Eve was the last time I saw him. Rory's birthday was the 28th of December, and on the evening of the 28th, we were going to be doing the Glasgow sub crawl, which is like a pub crawl thing. We were going to do that for his birthday. So we hadn't heard from him since the night before, and when everyone was kind of asking, like, oh, is this still going ahead, sort of thing, is it still happening? I trusted touch, and I messaged his dad to that he passed away. And we were all totally bewildered as to what had happened, because we didn't have the faintest idea that there was anything even remotely wrong. A couple of days later is when his brother kind of brought the boys and I. There was a group of about 7 or 8 of us that were always a kind of unit in school, and so all of us were just completely lost with each other. And it was his brother that explained to us that Rory had taken his own life. The month that followed was just such a strange time. It's hard to put into words how you feel in a situation like that, because it's a numbness, and you feel almost guilty for feeling that because, or this is in my instance, obviously, I mean, it felt like I should feel worse than what I was, but I just didn't have it in me for some reason. I just couldn't grieve the way that I was seeing other people do it. And that persisted all the way past Rory's funeral about 3-4 weeks later. And it was just a really strange situation, more than tragic to me. I still didn't know how to compute it. And then a couple months passed and I still sort of felt the same way. And lockdown followed. Keep in mind, I wasn't really able to do so much exercise as other people got the opportunity to in lockdown, because this knee injury had stopped me from running and things, you know. So, and I was working in an internship at the time in Fife. So it was about April, June. Yeah, between April and June, I would say. This is probably, it seems quite strange or quite different, but for me, it was probably quite a big factor. Is I'd started listening to a new band that I'd never really listened to called Frightened Rabbit, and I don't know if some people are familiar with Frightened Rabbit, but their lead singer, Scott Hutchison, had committed suicide 2 years earlier, and a lot of his lyrics were just very honest and quite raw about how he felt, and people say that it was almost like he was writing suicide notes for 10 years. And it was just so strange that something as subtle as that was just so much to sort of send me over as well. And it was at that point when my grief really hit in quite hard. And, you know, it was strange how that connected so much with me, because after that, you know, you started having these kind of awful visualizations of what you were going to do and how that would make other people react. And it was just something so surreal to me that, you know, even to this day, I'm still not fully convinced that I ever would have done something silly. But I think the thing that was worse for me is that the thought was coming into my head altogether. And for someone that was, you know, 23 years old and things were pretty good for me. You know, I had an internship, my family are really good, I've got wonderful friends, but all of it just seemed so irrelevant. And all I could focus on was how that feeling was making me feel, you know. So, yeah, ultimately, I had those feelings, and similar to what Rory was doing, or, you know, before he passed away, I struggled to tell people about it. I didn't necessarily feel the need to tell anyone. And I sort of struggled away still, and, you know, my struggles were my own. I subtly kind of made reference to it to my friends, but I hadn't really highlighted the importance of it at all. Still, every single day, I would have these horrible, you know, thoughts of the route to my work involved going over a pretty big bridge, and you know, just silly things like thinking about pulling over there. It's just things that came nearly every day. But alas, ultimately, even in the sort of doom and gloom of lockdown, one night I was just talking to my friends, and it was then that I'd explained to them exactly how I'd been feeling about the whole thing. And a lot of them were in a similar boat, that the grief didn't set in until a few months later. But yeah, that they weren't necessarily able to help me so much, but just being able to tell it to them felt it was just the most liberating feeling that I'd ever experienced in my lifetime. It felt like the most enormous weight had been taken off my shoulders, and I was able to tell them about that and just go into all the details, knowing that they were going to listen so impartially to me. You know, that was about the end of June, and even still, the problem kind of kept coming back again between July and sort of until the start of September. And that Pippa mentioned in our presentation, it's just you've no motivation, you feel defeated before the days even started, and those days are tough. But fortunately, I was able to talk to the people that I felt the most trusting in to really pull me through, and it made what was a pretty horrible situation for me a slightly easier one, knowing that I had such a good network around me. So Now that sort of, again, I can't believe that's over a year ago, but now that the dust has kind of settled on things, it's given me the opportunity to reflect on it. And I don't feel so uncomfortable talking about it now as I did in June, because I feel like once I spoke about it for the first time, it really was like a new page had been turned on the situation, and I felt so much more comfortable talking about it and knowing that, what I've been through, although every situation will be different most of the time, my situation is one that someone might be able to relate to. And for me, knowing that I can have an effect on someone pulling through as well, the way that my friends did for me, is probably more rewarding than any feeling that I'm ever going to feel. So that's why, as of now, as well as still struggling away with my studies and final year, so applying for jobs and stuff, I still try and make a very conscious effort of making sure that my friends are all doing well, and that catching up with people that I've not seen for a while, just to make sure that everyone's doing well, doing everything that I can to make sure that people's minds are in the right place, sort of thing,
Ali, that was very, very powerful. Thank you so much for being so open about it. Obviously, with University Mental Health Day on Thursday, we're really keen to open up these kind of conversations and make it okay not to be okay. And I think you articulated that really well. And I'm glad that you feel more comfortable talking about it now. And I hope that your story can inspire other people to kind of open up with their friends or teammates.
Thanks, Georgie. It's a really difficult thing to talk about, and even still, a lot of people might not know exactly how to respond. And I think what made me feel a lot more comfortable talking about it was knowing that they probably wouldn't know how to respond. But that was, again, it didn't really matter. It was just more important to me that I could get it off my chest, and I knew that the people that I was saying it to wanted to know. And again, probably one of the saddest things for me was just it was upsetting knowing that, my best friend didn't feel like he could do that for us. And there's thousands of people out there just now that feel like that. But if we can let as many of them know as possible that there's absolutely no danger in it at all, that it's going to be better once they get that off their chest.
Yeah, I think if we can come away from this webinar and just having helped one or two people, then it'll all have been completely worth it. I think there's lots of people sending some comments to you now on the chat, so I just want to say thank you again for being problem. Honest and open. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Georgie.
Thanks, Ali. So on to our fourth speaker of the evening, we've got Danny. So Danny's a lacrosse player at Derby and has been involved in the creation of the Changing Mentality podcast with men in capitals. So he's going to talk about his own experiences of mental health and the rise of conversation on men's mental health. So I'll pass over to you now, Danny.
Brilliant. Cheers, Georgie. And again, to Alistair, like, fair play, man. That was powerful stuff. Very, very brave to come out and say those sort of things. But I guess to introduce myself, I'm Danny. I'm a second year sport and education student at the University of Derby. And I've also held roles in the student union as just a part-time officer for mental health awareness, as inclusivity officer in the Sports Council, and also on the podcast, I guess producing and writing and recording Changing Mentality, which I'll go into a bit more detail afterwards, but it's essentially a podcast just opening up discussions around men's mental health from people all over the UK. Just a bit of a background for myself. I came to the UK to study sport and education with the intention of bringing more mental health into a education side of things. I did this because I felt like there's a massive lack of education or surrounding mental health from such an early age. And for me personally, I like Alistair, unfortunately, I've lost a few people to suicide in my lifetime. And from those experiences, I've managed to reflect on my own mental health, which wasn't good for a long time. And I didn't realize it until I went to a doctor's and went, oh, I'm not feeling great. I'm having, chest pains. I can't sleep. These are my experiences, obviously, but and then I was diagnosed, and I sort of, woke up a bit to my own situation. And the more I developed my own mental health and learned more on the subject, I sort of felt myself getting angrier, not with myself, but with the situation that I was put in. I was first diagnosed when I was 19. And at that stage, I'd left school for 2 years. And I was just working, and I was generally not happy, but getting by on my day to day. And a thought popped into my head thinking, like, if you'd have known the basic knowledge that you do now, because I know very little. I had the very basics to get me by and to improve my own mental health and my own daily life. But if I had held even a percentage of that knowledge when I was 10, 11, 12, what sort of, like, how different would my life have been? How much happier would I have been at this moment of time if I'd had that? So that was the main driving force of me to go to university. And then once there, I just wanted to open up as many avenues for myself as possible to make myself more aware of what the situation is, because this is a new country to me. So just taking on all those roles when they were presented to me. And then I think one of the most important factors for me personally was joining a sport, joining lacrosse. I'd never played it before. I was always awful at all sports. Like, I'd never done anything higher than amateur or just kick around with my friends. But taking up something new and being in an environment where people are also in a similar situation as you. So not many people had played lacrosse at the university. So we were all in the same boat. And there was just this big mutual understanding of what everyone was sort of going through. And then that sort of translated well to me anyway, talking about my mental health with my teammates. So you start small, you don't want to shock anyone, obviously, but when you start to open up about mental health with people, it sort of comes in layers, if that makes sense. And the more I spoke, the more I found that there were other people going through similar situations. And of course, I was 21, 22 at this stage. I'm talking to 18-year-olds. So in my head, it sort of clicked like, oh, like, did you know this? Or do you know about this service? And surprisingly, no one really knew a whole lot about the whole counseling, about mental health techniques like CBT or just anything. They had the bare minimum idea that mental health is a thing, and then that's it. So that sort of, again, pushed me on to taking up bigger roles, the volunteering roles, to just open up the discussion around mental health and let people know, like, there are services for you and you don't have to just put up with it. There's something you can do about it. And there's other people going through similar situations that can help you through it. And that sort of rolled me into the Changing Mentality podcast, which I saw advertised on Student Space, the Student Mind, sorry. And I just applied for it, and then they took us all into this sort of like similar meeting now, where we all got to share a bit of our experiences and what we wanted from the project. And everyone sort of seemed to be going through their own sort of mental health challenges. Some of them were graduates, some of them were undergrads, and there was just a lot of lines crossed that where we sort of felt what the other person was going through, and we all sort of got the sense of, okay, so we need to do this not for ourselves but for other people, so that they can know that this isn't something that's solely going on in your head and you're an alien and you're isolated. It's just to know that, like, oh, there's a bunch of lads recording in their bedrooms and they're going through the exact same thing that I'm going through. And through that experience, I've learned more probably through creating the podcast than I have on my own, but just things like something simple as listening, you know, impartially listening to someone. If you find yourself in a position that you are, you know, safe to listen to, just not saying anything, just having someone ramble on to you, and then you not try to solve any of their issues. You're just there to listen and to help. And then you can combine that with the, you know, the signposting knowledge. And then all of a sudden, you know, that person now has a new avenue. It's not just they've not just halved their problem, but there's a possible help to further that solution. And then for me, the podcast in itself, there's so many subjects that we've already covered, and it's, for me personally, the thing that attracted me most to the podcast is being able to have an entire archive of just conversations and tips and tools and knowledge that anyone can just go back on. It's targeted at young men, but to be honest, like, they're global subjects, like anyone can go and listen to them. So just having that information there that anyone can access at any time is amazing. But for me, the most important thing, I guess, is I'd like to see not just changes in our attitudes towards mental health on a ground level. We need to see changes come from up above, from more from universities. I know they're doing a lot, but more needs to be done, more from unions and more from the government and the education. Because if it's not changed from the top, it's not going to change a whole lot. There's only so much we can do as people, and putting the responsibility onto individuals to help each other out. It can go well, but it can also go very bad. And we need that support and that safety net, so that we can know what to do safely and to guide people to actually improve, and so this doesn't reoccur. And this podcast, for me, it's sort of a collection of all those voices to say, you know, here's your problem. If you can't just look solely at statistics, the statistics are bad, but you need a personal touch. You need voices, and the more voices there are, the harder it is to ignore, if that makes sense. So just being able to collect all of these raw emotions, not just words and digits on a page, but these expressions of what people are actually going through, what young students, young men are going through, then you can start to look at it from a different angle and hopefully make those changes systematically, so it's better reflected on the population, rather than just, you know, tell everyone to go for a run and talk to a friend. But yeah.
Can I only hope that people like you are rising up to positions of power in governments, universities, SUs, etc. And I can imagine that one day that will probably be you. Thank you. So hopefully. Thank you so much for that. It was really great to hear about, I guess, the power of listening, and how important that is, and your experiences with the podcast. In our email tomorrow with the link to the webinar, we'll be sharing a link to the podcast as well. So for everyone listening, that will be available then. Just going to pass over to Sophie from Student Minds now, for everyone kind of keen to know what actions they can take from the webinar, kind of what resources are available. So over to you, Sophie. I'm going to try and share my screen to get the resources up for you.
Thanks, Georgie. And I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone so far for sharing their experiences. It's been really valuable, but also really powerful, and really reiterates the power of both listening, as Georgie just said, but also talking. So just a massive thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm the training manager at Student Minds, and Student Minds is the UK's student mental health charity. And at Student Minds, what we've done is we've adapted to the pandemic through the creation of Student Space. In August last year, we launched this new program to support students, and it is free to access for all higher education students in England and Wales. And it has been specifically designed to support students during the pandemic. However you're feeling, there is help and there is guidance available. So Student Space is here to help in a few different ways. So you can access dedicated direct support services, so via phone, via web chat, text and email. But also on the website, there is information and there are tools to help you through the challenges of the pandemic, such as written articles and videos. And there's also help to find what support is available at your place of study. So you can actually search for your university and see what support services are available. So do take a look at Student Space in your own time and make sure you're using it, because it's a really good tool. Thanks, Georgie.
Thanks, Sophie. So that kind of completes the kind of speaker bit of the evening, and we're going to move on to the Q&A. But before we do that, I'm just going to share the poll to ask if you know what support services are available at your university, and if you feel comfortable using them. Again, this poll is completely anonymous as well. So whilst we're doing that, would like to invite all our panelists back up on the screen again. So please all turn your videos back on, and we'll get started with the questions. So had quite a few come in before the webinar, so keen to get through some of those as well. So we'll start with a question for Pippa and Issy. I know you have some thoughts on this as well, of how can you alter your coaching method for a player experiencing an anxiety disorder? So Pippa, I will head to you first.
Sure. I think this is a really, really good question. And the first thing that I would say is that it's really important to understand the relationship between the person's anxiety and the sport that they're participating in. So it could be that, you know, when you get to a certain level, I think that sometimes sort of participating in sport and competition can be anxiety inducing. So if that's the case, you know, that person might need some time out of sport, or, you know, might need to just skip a few sessions, which you know, I think should be absolutely fine. And then once they restart, coaches should be mindful of what they've been going through, and lots of positive reinforcement, you know, just, yeah, lots of encouragement, and get them to speak to people as well. You know, as a coach, just encourage them to talk to their fellow athletes who, you know, the likelihood is have been going through the same thing. Like event anxiety is, everybody gets that. So people will understand, you know, to a certain extent what that person's going through. And if you are a coach as well, and you have other people coaching the team, so you have a team of coaches, don't be afraid to talk to each other. I'd probably get the athlete's permission first, or just let them know that, you know, is it okay if I talk to the other coaches, because then they can be aware of what's going on and, you know, are there to support you. Is that okay? So get their consent first. But yeah, just share. And, you know, on the flip side, it might be that the sport is a way of sort of just, you know, releasing that stress and sort of a distraction technique from that anxiety, which again is fine. You just need to let that person know that you're there, and, you know, you're there to listen and to signpost them to wherever they need to be signposted to.
Awesome. Thanks, Pippa. Issy, I will come to you next, because I know that anxiety is something that you've experienced in your sport before. So let's get your answer on that.
Yeah, I've relocated. Yeah, I'd say that for me, it was very much a sense of comparing myself to others. So I'd see other people's scores going up on the board, and I'd think, oh, I want to be better than that person, or I should be better than that person was my key one. I was very good at saying I definitely should be doing better than this, or I've trained enough that I should be doing better than that. And then I also had this inherent sense of perfectionism, which is classic for me. And I still haven't quite, I can channel it now to be useful sometimes, but I do notice it now. But when it becomes to be a sports player and you have this perfectionism complex, and you compare that and you compare yourself to others, they don't mix well. And I mean, they can, and then they can to the athlete, especially if you do well. But what that does is feeds back into this mechanism, into this negative cycle that, okay, you're getting rewarded for these two things that are actually not doing you very good.
Yeah.
And So it feeds into the cycle that your brain thinks, oh yeah, this is a good thing, and actually it's not. And it's very hard to get out of, and that's definitely something I struggled with, and I had to physically stop my sports to get myself out of that cycle, which is, you know, the last resort thing, and I really wish I didn't have to do that. And I'm now back into them in a much more healthy respect, but you know, that's so sad for me to have to do when I was absolutely loving them, but I wasn't loving them in the right way, and that's not the best thing to do.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that quite a lot of other people have quite sadly experienced as well. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Next question is, if you have friends that have reached out to you about their mental health, is there a right answer of what to do or say or how to help? Ali, I know you covered this a little bit in your talk about, you know, there might not be a correct answer of what to say. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit on that subject.
I suppose the simple answer is no. There probably isn't exactly the correct thing to say, because it's hard to say. Is there any, you know, true experts on this? Because I think every case is so subjective as well.
Yeah.
As someone that, you know, coming from the opposite angle of this, as someone that went and reached out to other people, for me it was just most valuable to me that they would listen, and that it felt like I could speak so transparently with them and know that it would be received so, you know, openly by them. So for me, there doesn't necessarily have to be a right thing to say, but just having the patience and understanding and the compassion to listen to people and be as open-minded about what could be going on in their life that is getting them into that situation in the first place. It's sort of the thing I would say, but one of the other things, and you know, again, some of the things that my friend said to me, there was one person in particular that really I reached out to in the sort of June to August period when I was struggling then. My best friend Ben, I'll give him a plug now, but Ben was, you know, whenever I fell into this kind of trap with him, he would always remind me that about a lot of the kind of tiny changes that I make to other people's lives and how valuable that is to them. And they were the things that really kept me going when it was quite tough as well, just knowing that, irrespective of how I might feel, knowing that I contribute that to other people's lives. And, you know, ultimately it was that pulled me through in the other end, I'd like to think.
That's really nice. Like, Ben sounds like a fantastic friend. So hopefully he is listening. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I'm going to go to you, Sophie, just to talk about it from more of a kind of signposting point of view, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So we go through this and topics similar to this in our mental health and sport workshop on how to spot signs that your teammate might be struggling and what to do. And we say that the main things are to be there to listen, to not try to fix the situation, but actually just to support, to listen, and then to try and encourage them to seek signposting or support elsewhere. And it's really important that actually you're encouraging them and you're not trying to fix the situation for them. You're letting them have an open conversation with you in which you are really listening and you're really taking in what they say.
Okay. Thanks, Sophie. Next question that we've got is, what thoughts do you have on addressing the mental well-being for injured athletes? Because a lot of us have been in that situation, and I mean, Ali, you've said you are injured at the moment as well, and it's a really tough time. So Pippa, I'll go to you first from, I guess, more of a kind of scientific point of view on it, and then Ali, I'll head to you to hear about your own experience.
Thanks, Georgie. Yeah, I think lots of people have experience of this, don't they? And you know, injury can be truly devastating for an athlete, and I think it's really hard not to catastrophize it. So you get injured and you think, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to participate in sport ever again, and you almost go through like a grieving process. You know, it's really, really hard. But there are things that that you can do and that your teammates can do to sort of help you get through that. So there's lots of research to say that optimism and self-efficacy. So our self-efficacy is the belief that you can carry out a certain thing, which is really, really relevant to sport. So those two things are good indicators for good recovery from injury. So people who are optimistic tend to sort of engage more with the rehabilitation process. They do their physio exercises, etc., and they have better injury outcomes. So as sort of teammates and coaches, lots of positive reinforcement in that respect is a really good, really, really key. The other thing which I think is important is that when you're injured, especially sort of in the long term, if you're somebody that sort of participates in sports all the time and it's a key part of your life, you can sort of lose your identity a bit, I think. So keeping that person involved with the team can be really, really helpful. Sometimes they might not want to, sometimes they might find it a bit difficult, but I think keep offering, keep involving them, and that, obviously has positive effects.
Thanks, Pippa. As someone who suffered ACL tear previously, I can definitely empathise with that. Ali, I know you've had the same. So could you tell us a little bit about your experiences as an injured athlete and how you cared for your own kind of well-being at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I relate so much with a lot of the things that Pippa was saying there. My injury was a bit of a weird one, that it got misdiagnosed 3 separate times before it was finally diagnosed as a cruciate ligament tear. I think it was about 8 months after it originally happened. Then COVID hit in, so it was a year until I could get the surgery. And then, I'm in month 6 now of my recovery. So finally, I've kind of started getting back into things again. But I mean, yeah, from someone that I was playing basketball about 5 times a week before my injury, and my injury actually happened at my trial for the Scottish Universities team. So I was at a pretty good point in where I was playing. And so, yeah, just the deflation of it more than anything, when I felt like I was in such a good place going to some, being unable to walk, and post-surgery, when I was finally able to get that, I was learning how to walk again. So at that point, you're worrying, am I going to be able to run again? I do a lot of cycling. Am I going to be able to do that again? And it's the uncertainty, which was the hardest thing for me. And I don't really cope well with uncertainty so much. And I know that's, probably one of the things that drives a lot of anxiety in people as well. But, like Pippa said, finding any great optimism is, so valuable to you in that situation, or it was to me at least. And ultimately, just with patience and with trust in what's happening, and ultimately a corner might turn. And, I'd like to again, I feel like I'm in quite a good place with even that just now as well, now that I'm able to just go small runs and stuff and get back on my bike.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali. Hopefully all positive from here in regards to your injury. And then next question we've got for Danny and Izzy is how to adapt or change a toxic sport environment to one that's more inclusive and welcoming. So Danny, I'll go to you first with this.
Thanks. I think obviously it depends on the severity, but the simple things that you can do in a sport, for example, firstly, it needs to come from the committee. They need to be made aware of what the situation is exactly. Is it an individual? Is it from coaches? Is it something that's been embedded in the club for a long time that no one's really talked about? So if you're just a member, bring it up to committee. If you're from committee, then I think for me, what we did at our club when we had issues was we laid down sort of like a philosophy and rules that players should abide to, if that makes sense. So something that we stand by, like no bullying, everyone's welcome, examples like that. So everyone's aware of what the situation is.
Yeah.
And then moving on, if you know, if it is an individual, then you need to go further up the ladder to find them the correct support. But that's what I've got from my situation, my experience.
Oh, thank you, Danny. Issy, I'm sure you have quite a few thoughts on this, given I guess creating a welcoming environment is one of the kind of key pillars of welfare in sport. So do you want to talk to us a bit about your experience with this?
Yeah, I'd say that first off, just to build on for what Danny said, is that I'd say that actually there's no such thing as just a member of a club, because sometimes you can find that it's a committee that can be starting the toxic atmosphere or something, or it's a culture that a club's had for many, many years. And then, you know, recent changes in how society views something or a sport actually means that, you know, new members coming in might actually think, actually, this isn't how we do it at our old clubs. And so I think it's important for new members to be able to feel that there are people that they can talk to who aren't on committee. So coaches and, you know, people like Welfare and Sport who are I'm going to plug us again. What a surprise. You know, there are people outside of their club that they can talk to. And that's the importance of, you know, SU officers, student groups like us, personal tutors even at university. They can still get involved with things like this. If it's something that's affecting you, it's something that's affecting them in a way. Yeah. It's good enough that, well, it's not good enough. It's important enough that they should be wary of it. But I think in terms of the, you know, diversity inclusion side of things is really what we do, our pledges are, you know, actually sitting down at the beginning of the year or on a termly basis to think as a group or as a committee or as a club or in small groups or whatever, or as teams. Even some clubs, we've had some clubs, so for instance our netball club is absolutely massive, and so each team submits a different pledge because which is really good, so because they all have slightly different training schedules, and to actually think, okay, let's set out priorities for the year. What is our main issue and how are we going to tackle that? And so you get some really unique situations for each club, which, you know, isn't going to be a one size fits all. And that's how you actually tackle the diversity inclusion side of things. You really need to think on an individual basis and actually think about it, as opposed to just scribble something down on a piece of paper and go, that'll do for the year. Like, you know, if something's been consistently brought up at an AGM as something that needs to be worked on, maybe you should work on it. You know,
take notice.
Take notice and do something about it. And I think, you know, pledges like this, or even just ask, I mean, we're working with our sports executive to maybe do surveys of club members at the moment, to think, actually, what is it that people want? What is it in welfare and EDI that people actually want to see? Because we can't manage all 75 clubs, every individual member in every one of those 75 clubs. Tell us, and we can do something about it. And so look at it from the other way, and that's a good way to look at it too.
Great, thank you, Issy. That was, I think, really beneficial for hopefully quite a lot of committee members if listening, but also just general members of clubs. So hopefully that has helped. We've talked about how universities are really trying to up their support at the moment with the amount of mental health support they're offering. But one question's come through about what would you have liked your SU to do for you to support students' mental health? And this might be just quite a nice opportunity to kind of think about what universities could potentially be doing in the future that you think would be really beneficial. So Ali, I will go to you with this, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So again, when I was sort of struggling myself, I was quite, I wouldn't say separate from my sports union, but just because I was doing my internship, I wasn't as present around it as I was maybe the year before that. But I still stayed involved in committee roles, and just because I love it and I like staying involved with it. So it meant that when I was looking for support, the sports union would never have been my first place to turn to. In fact, a lot of the things that people would normally go to in these situations, I've always just kind of felt like they weren't the best for me. Not from a narrow-minded point of view, but just from my personal trust would have been with the people that I cared about most. But in answer to the question, I think it's quite a difficult one. I think Heriot Watt, our sports union, have been particularly good in promoting the mental health message, personally, if I may say so. I think Amber, our president, and all of the executive team really try their best to normalise the conversation of mental health. And for me, that is definitely what is most important about it, because, you know, I mentioned earlier about how it was quite difficult for me to tell people when I was at my worst. And I think that's why podcasts like Danny's and a lot of the other things that are going on at the moment, it's so important that they're listened to, because it's normalising a conversation which has to be had. And I think as sports unions, you know, promoting that message with its membership is one of the most valuable things that it can do. That there's absolutely no judgment from a conversation like that, and doing whatever we can to, you know, remove that stigma that's been associated to talking about mental health will be, you know, ultimately it's going to save people's lives. So yeah, I think trying to normalise the conversation as much as we possibly can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ali. I think that probably brings us to the end of our webinar, given that we're running like 15-20 minutes over. However, I didn't want to stop all our panelists when they were giving such great advice. So a huge thank you to all of our panelists for today, and to Student Minds for their support as well. Should you be affected in any way, we'll be sending around resources and helplines tomorrow via email, along with a video recording. Just got final poll for you. This is just going to help us kind of work out if we need to run some more mental health workshops and webinars, just asking you how much time you'd be willing to devote to developing your mental health online, either per week, per fortnight, a few hours a month. And post-pandemic, would you still be keen to engage in mental health webinars and workshops related to sport? So I'll just leave that up on there for you to fill out. So hopefully this webinar has encouraged a lot of you to have open conversations in your uni sports teams. I know if there's anything that I've taken away from it, it is the importance of just being open and being able to talk to people, and then conversely being able to listen as well. There's already a lot of amazing groups and initiatives out there. Just a few of them were highlighted tonight. So take the time to research them and talk about them with your teams. Obviously on Thursday, it is University Mental Health Day. On Bucks's social channels, we'll be talking about all the initiatives that are being done by uni sports teams. So if you are running anything on Thursday or just during this week, please do tag us in them so that we can repost them and spread the brilliant work that you are all doing. So I just want to say a final thank you to all our panelists for being so open, so honest about their experiences, and providing such fantastic advice to everyone here watching. And then finally, thank you all for joining. It's great to see so many different representatives from so many different universities and committees very willing to have all these conversations and make an impact on all your fellow students' university experience. So a big thank you to all. That's all of it from us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully we will see you on a sports field soon. Have a nice evening.